recently reviewed the movie Late Night with the Devil, and I did quite enjoy it. I think most people probably did. So I was curious to see if there were any other movies that had a kind of similar concept. The obvious one that comes to mind is the 90s, I guess, movie Ghostwatch, which was actually a British kind of live presentation, or at least that's how it was sold to the British public, where we have a group of recognisable TV presenters that go around and do an investigation of a haunted house, and things start to happen. Of course, it was just a kind of a scripted drama in reality, but it was presented like it was a live and authentic kind of haunted house broadcast, effectively. But we're not talking about that one. We're actually talking about maybe a lesser known one today, and this one is from 2013, and it is called WNUF Halloween Special. Now, this is presented as a kind of local UHF broadcast which has been taped on VHS and includes commercials, and it's effectively like a local news channel in America set in the kind of the presumably mid-80s, doing this kind of Halloween special while they, for the most part, are investigating a kind of haunted house. And inevitably, you know, there may be more to the story than kind of initially expected. In between all these kind of like segments, we have various infomercials, adverts, kind of presenters and things like that, all peppered through the kind of the film, so it feels like an authentic recording from the kind of the 1980s. The bulk of the story, or at least that's in regards to the kind of the horror elements, is focusing on this reporter who is going into this house where there was a killing 20 years prior to try and commune with the dead, and he brings in like this kind of Ed and Lorraine Warren types, paranormal investigators, and a kind of a guy who's, you know, who's presented as a kind of priest, and they go in there to try and commune with the dead, but there may be something else in there that they're not expecting. So let's talk about it. What do I think worked in this movie's favour? So this is an interesting idea in this one, that it's very, very authentic, which is a plus but also a detriment. So we'll come on to maybe why this is a detriment in just a little bit. But for the plus point, you really feel like they have made some very creative, low budget elements work here to present as a very real 80s recording. Apparently they found a lot of kind of stock footage that they kind of edited and made into these kind of like fake commercials. Just the general presentation, the aspect ratio, the kind of the cheesy kind of on-air presentation from the kind of the actors and things like that, the kind of the low fight kind of technology, if that makes sense. So it presents very, very authentically with this kind of UHF kind of channel, this recording. And apparently what the filmmakers did, they tried to create buzz by, you know, it being a 2013 movie, but they tried to, you know, sell it out as this kind of forgotten TV recording that was actually recorded from the 80s and things like that. But well, apart from these kind of like things where it kind of fake fast forwards, it very much feels like it's very genuinely from that kind of time period. The movie also has some kind of funny moments, but it doesn't overplay its hand with the comedy, I think, for the most part. And the comedy comes in, I would say, two main forms. The kind of the cheesiness and silliness of some of the kind of the fake commercials here are obviously meant to, you know, rub that kind of nostalgia bone a little bit, and I think, oh yeah, I remember kind of adverts like this, and just how kind of silly they were. But our main reporter, who's the one that's going into this house, is quite kind of sarcastic, and his kind of conversations dealing with various people. You know, the kind of the paranormal investigators, this kind of crowd that's outside the house, things like that, callers in. His kind of sarcastic way of kind of talking to them and being quite kind of blunt with them, I kind of quite like. So there are some kind of, I wouldn't say laugh out loud moments in this movie, because it's not trying to be a comedy per se, but it is quite amusing. And I have to say, because the movie does the work so well in making this feel quite authentic, the scenes that are in the house and do have the more kind of spookier elements within it, I feel work pretty well. let me be clear, you're not seeing much with this one, but I think it does actually feel like if you can immerse yourself into this movie, you'll kind of get sucked in and go along with the ride. Now, when it's all revealed, I don't know if it was quite as effective as maybe it could have been, but you know, it's still a pretty good kind of ride if you don't mind some of the kind of the negative bits, which I'm going to talk about. And the main thing here is I think this movie is almost a little bit too authentic in some ways. Now, what do I mean by that? This movie has a lot of like fake commercials. When I say a lot, I'm not exaggerating. Every couple of minutes, this movie is cutting to a commercial break. Now, some of it is used to kind of reset the story. So we have our kind of characters in a different position. But it's as an audience member watching this, you are watching all these kind of fake commercials that are done in an 80s style. Some of them are quite amusing, but there is a lot. And I think they overplayed their hand a little bit too much in this one, because you're feeling probably the majority of this runtime is you're watching kind of fake commercials. And you just kind of want to get to the point, because these commercials really have no bearing on the actual kind of plot itself. There's a couple of kind of Halloween themed ones, but yeah, it's very much of its time, but it's, you know, it's ultimately kind of like a little bit over the top, if we're being honest. I suppose that's what these kind of UHF channels were like. So again, it's authentic, but it is somewhat distracting after a little while. And when it actually comes down to when you're talking about the story portions of this movie, it's relatively minimal, if we're being honest. And the actual kind of plot in regards to the haunted house and what actually happens, when it's revealed what it is, I don't know if it made 100% sense to me. There is a kind of a foreshadowing, or at least a kind of like a somewhat of a idea earlier on in the movie if you're kind of watching carefully, but to me it didn't quite make sense in regards to what we have seen and how that presents. That's all I'm going to say, because I don't want to spoil it for you. And yes, we don't see a huge amount on screen. Now, the acting is cheesy, but I think that's by design. This is meant to be kind of like low budget, you know, UHF TV hosts in the kind of 80s America, and it's very kind of over the top and silly. I have seen some critiques of the acting, but I think it's by design, so I can't really fault it for that. This movie isn't as entertaining as Late Night with the Devil. Obviously, that's a much more higher profile and recent film, but I gotta say, I will give the filmmakers here props for making a very authentic and believable slice of kind of like 80s nostalgia, very much in the mould of Ghostwatch, maybe more so than the Late Night with the Devil, to be honest with you. But if you don't mind having to sit through a lot of these commercials, which I think, as I say, it went a little bit too many of those, if I'm honest, even though it's probably, you know, realistic about how many there actually are in those kind of style of channels in the 80s. It's still an entertaining movie, and I had to give props for the creativity. So I will give it a 6 out of 10. It's probably worth a watch if you don't mind that. Have you seen it? What did you think? Please do leave me a comment, and I shall look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.